When you're installing a floating floor, or really any flooring, after all the trim has been installed, so you're probably replacing a floor, we've all ran into a situation like this. And I think we've all probably seen those floors where somebody cuts and you can see a gap around the edge, maybe where you have the curve of this casing, and it just looks unfinished, and that's not how you want it to look. So if you have a situation like this where you don't want to remove all your casing, you don't want to remove all your jambs, what I have already done is we take a scrap piece for height. And I do this before I have all this here just because it makes kind of a mess, and then you can clean it all up before you install. But if you get to this point, that's okay. And so you're going to use this for the height, and then you're going to take like an oscillating tool. I love a multi-tool like this. I use it for a lot of things, but you also can use, there's something, I think it's called a Japanese pole saw, and it's got a blade on both sides and you can pull. I'll try to post a picture. You could undercut with a saw like that. It's just going to take, you're going to need to make sure you don't have stuff around it that you might gash with your saw and damage. But if you don't have this specialty tool, you can use a Japanese pole saw, and then they have even more specialty tools. But basically you want to undercut this. So, you know, if we hadn't done this, we'd hit into it, but see how now we have some room to work with, because there's actually a lot of room back behind. You know, we have our framing, which is a 2x4, and then we have drywall, and then we have our trim. And instead of trying to cut it exactly perfect, because we also want to have a gap because this is a floating floor and we have some expansion and contraction, we can push that under, and then your cut doesn't have to be perfect. It can be wonky under there. So we take a piece of scrap that we can damage, we take our saw, or our oscillating tool, and then we're just gonna go, and again, I've already done this, but we're gonna undercut. Once it's undercut though, then we can draw our lines. You're not really gonna measure anything to make our piece and slide it into place. And again, just to clarify, I have undercut under all of this. I've undercut here, I've undercut both sides, and even if you need to, you can undercut under this trim if you're not removing it a little bit. Now, I'm gonna add some quarter round or an extra base molding over this trim, so I'm not worried about that, but I wanna be able to slide under all of this because I don't want any funky corners right here. So now basically all we're gonna do, I've put my first piece here, and then I'm gonna line up, and I've already cut mine, but all I do is I say that didn't have a cut in it yet. I'm lining it up exactly how it's gonna align over here. And then I just take a straight edge, and that could be, you know, you can use a straight edge, or you can just use a length of scrap flooring, and you're gonna draw your line. Now I'm factoring in a couple things in my case. This sticks out the furthest back here because I left the trim on, and then I have the outside, I don't have a square jamb, mine it gets skinnier here, so it's going to be wider back here, but as I get here, this is where it gets skinnier. So see how I've drawn this curve, because if I cut this at a corner, that's where you have this area like this, people cut that out and you see that visible gap, that visible cut. So I'm going to draw my lines based on this line back here, and I drew a line from back here, drew a line. I always undercut a little bit. You can always cut more. You can always cut more off, but once you cut it off under your piece, you got to use it as a scrap somewhere else. So my flooring I'm using here is not super expensive, but keep that in mind if you're concerned about it or you don't have a lot of extra. So we do our line back there for our, how far I want each side to cut out. Now, another thing you could potentially do that some people would do is they like to put like their connection right here. So you could have spaced this out where this is where your gap was at. In my case, I found, because once I slide this into place and I want to click it back, I like having something I can grab on both sides with my tapping block to hit against to tap back into these other pieces. I've had it where it ends right here, and then this little end piece, because again, I don't want a gap here because this is not going to get any sort of cove molding. This is a closet door. There's nowhere I can push to click it back in. So this way I can click my floor in, and I'll show you when we install what I'm talking about, but I can do it if I have something to grab on both sides. So I like having a little bit of girth on both edges of that. So we've done that line. Now, okay, so to figure out how deep we're gonna cut, because my piece is long and I don't have the room over here, I can't slide this over. I could slide it this way just to get the depth, so you could come over here and get that and be like, oh, I can't go any deeper than this, but I just want to show you, say you were in a situation where you did not have that space on this left side, just get one of your skinnier scrap pieces. We're going to make almost like a storyboard. We're going to click it into place. We're going to do our line. So I know this is the absolute farthest that I want my cut to come out. That's kind of my drop dead line, meaning if I cut further out than that, it's going to be visible. And then I just take my piece, my storyboard that I made over here, and I draw my line for this ultimate depth of my cut. So that's what I did. I drew my lines, And then as I draw my lines, I always kind of do a curve to remind myself, okay, I don't want to cut out this. And then you can always make that curve come out a little bit further, a little bit further. So now we're going to test our piece and see if we can make it fit. And I'm going to line it up over here with that piece if I can as I go. And I'm sliding it underneath where I've undercut. And so sometimes you do this and you get it wrong and you got to come back and fix it, and that's okay. So we're gonna kind of gradually try to get it in with our fingers. And I have a couple things here that I like to use. I have a tapping block and I have a mallet. Now, if I'm using a dark colored floor, I do a dark colored mallet. If I use a black mallet on this, the rubber does scuff off and it would mark it. So when I'm doing a light colored floor, I use a light colored mallet. Now there are tools, and it's almost like, I'll put a picture in this video, I don't have one here, and it like bends one way, it has a line, it's like a pry bar, but it has like a, basically opposing ends, and you can pull. I like those for an engineered floor. For a click and lock floor, the hard thing is it's really easy, these connections where you have these tongues and grooves, these break so easy. So I'll show you a pull bar, but I don't use them a whole lot when I'm doing a click and lock floating floor. So we've kind of hit that into place. Now we got to work on, we have this gap here, we got to work on pulling that tight, and you kind of just got to work it, because normally you would tilt this side up to get it to slide in and click, but we can't tilt, so we're doing more of a force this direction in this case. The hard thing here is you don't have a lot of leverage because you're up against a wall, so just be patient and work your way on it. I've got it kind of, you can see over here we've closed the gap, so now we're just kind of working our way across. Okay, so see that gap is closing. I feel like we could do a little bit more still. All right, I'm pretty good with that. Now, most importantly, see around here, we have no visible, can't see our cut lines, and it's all hidden without having to remove our casing, without having to remove any of our components of trim. And then what we'll do, we'll leave our gap as we finish our floor, and we'll put a piece of cord around there over the trim. But that saves you some time not having to remove those pieces.